actually going to be adopted as like an asset or a form of money, then it essentially should at some point have infinite demand. And it's truly scarce, like this thing's going to take over the world or it's going to get shut down. My way of like giving the proverbial FU to the pharmaceutical industry was like bagging this pound of cannabis and selling it into the free market, you know? Now I understand that it's just like a lot of the problems in the pharmaceutical industry are predicated upon the broken incentives in the fiat model. So I discovered Bitcoin, and a month later I get a license from the state of California. There I am standing on this property. I'm like, I don't know, 32 years old, holding this fucking license from the state of California. It's for me to produce legal cannabis. I'm like, this is a very vindicating moment for me in my life, right? And I'm thinking, this is a nightmare.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Eric V. Stacks is a cannabis producer and Bitcoin Maxi, and he's here in the Bitcoin Matrix studio for our first live in-person recording. Eric Stacks, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
Doing very well, man. Thank you for having me. I'm super pumped to be here.
Yeah, man. It's been great having you in town, actually.
Yeah.
When did you get in town?
3 days ago. First time in Florida. It's a pretty cool place, man.
Like first time ever?
First time ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you flew into Tampa, now you're in Sarasota?
Yep, checking it out. We're
All
going
right.
to Miami in a week from now.
Okay.
So kind of get most of the southern part of the state, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. The vibes are good. I understand why people like Florida, dude. The weather's good. You can delete your diesel exhaust fluid off of your big truck. You got guns, gators, beaches, fishing.
Yeah.
It's pretty alluring.
I mean, great weather,
Yeah.
tremendous freedom, and it's got like fantastic proximity to the United States of America.
Yep.
So that's kind of great. I mean, like I feel like we're in a different country in a way.
Totally.
And what did we do yesterday? We got to go boating together.
We did.
So that was pretty cool. And check out Florida from like the boat and like go to some beaches and stuff. And we were with Paul Tarantino.
Yeah.
And so like, what does it mean to you to be like traveling? It seems like you've been like trying to seek out meeting Bitcoiners.
Yeah, the last year, I started posting some content, just making random rips in the greenhouse talking about Bitcoin. And, a lot of people reached out to me, invited me to come to the conferences. And yeah, so we did. We've done podcasting and conference touring basically for the last year with my family and I. And it's been quite fun, I will say. I was living this hardcore Bitcoin Maxi life, kind of running around yelling at the same 20 people about Bitcoin for the last 5, 6, 7 years. How to start networking and finding my people. And I've been successful at doing so. It's been like hyper socializing. I've met so many people. I've had like kind of tough time keeping up with it, honestly.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to get into your backstory. Maybe what was it like for you growing up, and like kind of what maybe primed you for like Bitcoin and even like the cannabis industry?
Yeah. So when I was 5 years old, my parents split and divorced, and my mother remarried, and she married a psychiatrist. And so he was basically like an advocate for all these pharmaceutical and behavioral meds. He worked at the Riverside County prison system with inmates who had like mental disorders. And he would get visited by all these drug, salespeople from the pharmaceutical industry that would tell him about all the new fancy pharmaceuticals that he had, that they were, creating and promoting, and et cetera. And within a short period of time, my mom started taking antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills. And I watched her change over like a 10-year period of time, where she just became like a zombie shell of the person that she used to be. And by the time I was like, I don't know, I was 15, 16 years old, somebody, friends in high school had weed, and they're like, hey, you want to smoke weed? And I was very adverse to drugs and the whole notion or whatever. But the first time I smoked weed, I was like, dang, this plant is like, this is not gnarly. Like, you can get really wrecked on alcohol. You can smoke cigarettes. You can take all these crazy pills, but you can't smoke this plant, right? So that kind of primed me to start like becoming a little bit more rebellious and start to question the system more. And by the time I was 20 years old, my mother had taken a fatal dose of a barbiturate in an attempt to end her life. She was so depressed. Yeah. But that was like very impactful for me, obviously, and it kind of fueled me to become more passionate about cannabis and want to become a cannabis producer. Because at the time, it was like my way of like giving the proverbial FU to the pharmaceutical industry was like bagging this pound of cannabis and selling it into the free market, you know? Now I understand that it's just like a lot of the problems in the pharmaceutical industry are predicated upon the broken incentives in the fiat model, um, which I learned later after growing cannabis for 15 years and going through the regulatory process to become a county permitted and ultimately state licensed cannabis producer. So I had bought property in consultation with Humboldt County Planning Department in 2016 to get the property permitted by the county and then ultimately licensed by the state. And when I closed escrow on the property, this was the first time in my life where I had a real economic incentive to understand like what was causing the boom bust cycles. When in 2008 happened, I was like 22 years old selling cars for a Toyota store. So like I saw the economic problems, but like I wasn't in a position to like really dig deep to understand what was happening. And so going down the economic rabbit hole, I go through, kind of very quickly, you come on hard money, you learn about what happened in 1971 and the Federal Reserve and then Austrian economic theory. And then I discovered Bitcoin. And as being a commodity producer in a very short period of time, watching the value of the product that I was producing go down simply because the supply was increasing relative to the demand. The demand is being satiated with supply, which is bringing the value of the product down. And so I'm thinking like, okay, well, you have a supply cap on this purely monetary instrument that has no utility value. So if it's actually going to be adopted as like an asset or a form of money, then it essentially should at some point have infinite demand and it's truly scarce, like this thing's going to take over the world or it's going to get shut down, right? But I was like immediately enthralled. And it also helped me to understand how my dream come true. So I discovered Bitcoin, and a month later, I get a license from the state of California. There I am standing on this property. I'm like, I don't know, 32 years old, holding this fucking license from the state of California for me to produce legal cannabis. I'm like, this is a very vindicating moment for me in my life, right? And I'm thinking, this is a nightmare because the value of my property is going to be directly tied to the value of my product, which is most certainly going to go down now that it's legal to do so and people are going to just increase the supply. So I decided I needed to sell the property. So it took me like a year to sell the property. I did, and I pivoted my business model from being the cannabis business owner, farmer, producer, to doing consulting for a lot of other farmers that were struggling to deal with the descending margins. So that's what I did for the last few years. Yeah, started posting some content about Bitcoin, and now I'm here.
Oh yeah, I mean, I want to break all of that down.
Yeah,
So I
let's
kind of
do
want to
it.
go back though to the beginning a bit. Like, how did you go from like smoking weed and thinking, okay, this might be like okay for me or cool or fun, to like selling weed and then even growing it, producing it?
That's a good question because I'm very risk adverse. But I just felt like watching my mother, who ultimately got a doctorate degree in sociology and became a professor of sociology at University of Redlands in Southern California, and some of her other family members, her brother, her sister, my older brother, several people get into pharmaceuticals. And I could just, there's something so I don't know, icky to say for like lack of a better word around the whole ethos, the vibe that I was very off put by. And I was an angry teenager. My parents were divorced and I started to be a little bit rebellious by the time I'm in high school. And I got ridiculed by my parents and like friends' parents because I liked weed. I was kind of treated as this like delinquent, right? And for me, that kind of almost like enforced the need to like almost explore it further because it seemed so benign, right? Like it just makes you feel good, right? Like,
Hmm.
and for me, it really helped mitigate the discomforts of life. So the affinity for cannabis kind of grew the harder my life got, I would say. And then I was basically just like in the fiat rat race in Southern California. It's like I just consider it all to be LA. It's 23 million fucking people in this whole giant, urban jungle. It's kind of depressing, and I had an opportunity from a friend that moved from the town I grew up in Humboldt County to go to Humboldt State University. They had met a grower who grew a bunch of weed, knew that I liked weed, and reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to come up to Humboldt County and trim?" And so I did, and I've been there ever since.
Okay, and then maybe and now you produce, you grow, which is
Yes,
a very different skill from smoking and
totally.
maybe even trimming.
Yes.
So how did it go from trimming to growing, and how did you find out you liked doing it? Or
Well, I obviously had an affinity for cannabis and I liked the outdoors, and Humboldt County was just such a beautiful place. I remember when I first got there to trim, like driving into Eureka, and I just drove like 4 hours of like redwood forest from the Bay Area north. And I just had this deep feeling like I knew that I was going to stay there and I was going to produce weed for as long as that made sense for me to do. So I trimmed for a season and then came back a few months later and worked basically for 2 years out in the middle of nowhere for this guy growing medical cannabis. It's like 2008, 2009, in this cabin with like a bunch of outdoor plants and a few like grow rooms. It was kind of gray market. It was still illegal technically because there was medical laws, but like if you got in trouble, like you could still have issues. You have to pay. It was kind of one of these you're guilty till you prove yourself innocent situations. And I just saved up cash and set up a grow and a garage and a rental. And then that compounded. I did that a few more times. The next thing I knew, I was in Garberville in Southern Humboldt with like 10,000 square feet of canopy and growing a bunch of
I
weed.
mean, like the first batches of weed you grew, probably not. You weren't legally selling them, were you? Or
But it was gray. So it was like you could produce the cannabis if you had a doctor's recommendation, and each county had its own health and safety code that would say how many plants or square footage that you could grow. In Humboldt County, the DA at the time was very progressive, and he allowed for 99 plants. And so, especially if you're outdoors, like you could grow 1,000 pounds with 99 plants, and a lot of people figured out how to do that. So it created this enormous industry. And you could then sell the product to a dispensary if you joined their collective under the 215 laws, which was the medical
Prop
marijuana laws.
215?
Yeah, it allowed you to, it was a nonprofit model where you could join a patient collective and you're part of the group, and then you could give them cannabis and they would donate you money. And then they would take the cannabis and they would give it to patients that needed it. And then the patient would then donate them money. But it was really, you're just producing the product and selling the product.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you pay the taxes, I have to adhere to Reg 280E. So I only get cost of goods sold. I can't get standard business deductions, but it was all legal. But like if you got into an issue with a sheriff of the county or whatever, like you could get arrested, and then your attorney's got to put up all your paperwork, and then you basically 5, 10 grand to the attorney. It's all corrupt, of course. They're all the attorney and the judges. They all have lunch, and it's like a whole scene, right? And so, yeah, it was definitely legal, but still very illegal in its ways, if that makes
Right.
sense.
The legalization of marijuana is such a weird thing in the sense that, like, I mean, I learned a lot from like what Bitcoin did, and like Peter McCormick had the Mallers family on, and I forget, I think it was this guy Tyler, a representative from, I think it was like Wyoming at the time.
Mhm.
He made a really interesting point because, like, when you go from like it's illegal, when you make it legal, you get this whole sort of white market business and regulated business, and the state gets involved, which creates a tremendous black market in a way, and you get like the black market and the gray market, and the black market gets bigger because you made it legal,
Yeah.
and you get all these unintended consequences. And instead of like maybe just making, instead of illegal, just not anything, and it's sort of like he was like using the point around like an apple pie. Like in certain states, you can't just bake an apple pie and sell that to your neighbor. Like you would need to like go through some sort of like food board
Right.
with the state and get it labeled. And that's kind of like my next question is like, so when you're growing this, like I wonder how the town or the county dealt with like, I mean, I'm sure there weren't any safety issues, but and some people are like, well, what if you get a bad batch or
Yeah.
it's sprayed with something, or how do you know? And it seemed like there was a lot of trust in the system.
Yeah, that and the product became so abundant that the free market dynamic really helps to take care of that, because if you have a bad product, there's so much other competition and product available, that kind of sorts itself out. But what was really interesting is being in a multi-billion-dollar industry that was existing and functioning full bore, that then the state comes in to regulate. So it was interesting watching the state try to come in a very formal way, license and permit and regulate this already mega industry or multi-billion-dollar industry that basically developed as a result of the demand in the marketplace for the product. And then the way that the 215 laws, the medical marijuana laws, were written and put into effect in 1996 did kind of allow for this big industry to develop. And then watching the state try to regulate it was really interesting because they offered the carrot and stick model. So in 2016, the people of the state of California were going to vote again to legalize cannabis for adult use, for recreational use. And in 2015, before that, the governor signed into effect the Medical Marijuana Regulations Act to basically tell the counties that like you can permit any cannabis activity in your county or you can ban it. And once you've decided what you're going to do with it, then the state is going to come in and license it. And so Humboldt County was ahead of the curve, and they had their land use ordinance ready when this document got signed into effect. And what was so interesting though is there was, so as an example, there's 12,000 farms in Humboldt County that you could see from satellite imagery. So Google Maps, I could take you on a tour on Google Maps and you could see all these greenhouses and all these open fields of cannabis. It's really obvious. 12,000 farms that were determined to be of commercial scale in Humboldt County. The county and the state issue regulations. They're going to permit, they're going to license. You need to register your farm by a particular deadline. I think this was the end of 2015 going into the beginning of 2016. Register your farm, you're going to get into the compliance process, you're going to get permitted, and you're ultimately going to get licensed. They said that they would prevent big corporate money from coming in. You couldn't stack multiple licenses. There would be an acreage cap. This was going to protect the farmer that was basically the current existing industry. Well, when the deadline hit in Humboldt County, 123 people registered their farm out of 12,000. And instead of the county like going around and sending out notices of violation or going and shutting people down, sending the sheriffs out or whatever, you can drive right up to these facilities. It's really easy to do. They went back to the drawing board. They dropped a bunch of the regulatory impedance, a bunch of the costs, and they came back out and they said, okay, they extended the deadline a year, and like half the people in the county got involved in the regulation process. And over the years, what's happened is that they have gotten rid of a lot of those incentives, like the acreage cap got dropped, the license stacking got dropped. So they kind of corralled the existing industry into the licensing model and then changed the rule sets that were in favor for that next echelon of capital. And the industry has then been consolidating as a result since then. But I will say overall, the legalization has made the criminal element much less of an issue. So you have the thriving legal market, then you have the thriving black market, because what used to be a potential felony now is a misdemeanor. You can grow any amount of cannabis, and if you're selling it to somebody in the state of California and it's not lawful, it's a misdemeanor. And so the incentive then to like go through the regulatory process, spend millions of dollars and set up a licensed facility is not that high when you can just grow illegal weed. And if you get caught, you got to deal with a misdemeanor. So you have this explosion in cannabis production, which is creating a higher quality of product and is driving the value of the product down, which I personally think is better if more people have the option to smoke cannabis. Like in Eureka, I'll drive around, there's like homeless people with like big bags of like, old last year's outdoor old weed, right? And so that's good. They're drinking less alcohol, doing less fentanyl or whatever, right? And so, yeah, it's been interesting to watch all that change over the years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, California's gone through like such change. I mean, like from like people being have like free land in the Santa Cruz Mountains to you hear stories of like drug cartels growing weed in state parks and national parks so they could be undetected to the legalization of the industry. I went to a town in Australia called NIMBY. And it's like it's like the marijuana capital of the world or something they claim, and it's like there's no alcohol in the town kind of thing. Like the bars don't have alcohol; it's just marijuana, and it's like all marijuana tourism, and it's like 3 hours above like Byron Bay, so you can only get there like. But you have to kind of find your way there or go on a tour bus. So it brings a lot of tourism. It's an interesting place. I want to go back though, because you've kind of threaded this needle, and I think where I think you dropped out of high school. We talked a little bit offline, and so I'd like to kind of dig into that, like what you were thinking, like because being a cannabis producer, you're in this multi-billion-dollar industry now. You've threaded the needle where you're doing it completely legal. You know all the laws, all the regulations. I'd love to ask like what you were thinking when you maybe decided to not complete high school, and like what like how were you planning on maybe threading that needle for the rest of your life? Because I think you mentioned you were rebellious, but it's a little bit more rebellious than most in some
Yeah,
ways, and it's probably brought its own challenges, I would think.
totally.
And it's a form of credentialism. So I want to like, I'm not trying to like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, man, like it's awesome. Like you, so I wanted to kind of dig into it because it's really cool. And it's like you fucked credentialism in a way.
Totally. Yeah. Well, so my parents were divorced, like I said. My mother remarried as a psychiatrist, and then he worked for the San Bernardino, or he volunteered for the San Bernardino County Search and Rescue team. And so he was an avid mountaineer. So we would go on these like ski and snowboard trips. So we take these long 12-hour, 18-hour drives to Utah, wherever from Southern California, and we would have a lot of deep spiritual and philosophical conversation. And when from the times I was like 6 to like 15 years old, my mother was going back to school, and she ultimately got a doctorate degree, and she was studying sociology, gender studies, interestingly enough. So I was like involved in all like deep philosophical and spiritual conversations, and then talking about gender and um, yeah, gender roles, all of the societal implications of the things that are changing the feminist revolution. And so I was kind of primed to be an outside of the box thinker at like a young age. I remember being in seventh grade and my history teacher was telling us some story about what happened in Europe. And I was just thinking like, I such a conscious thought, like, yeah, the winners write the history books though. And so I was just started questioning things at a younger age. And by the time I was halfway through high school, I was really struggling. I had such a problem with the idea that I could pass the tests, but I needed to go home and do busy work. So I just got to a point where I was like, "Fucking, I don't care. I'm not going to do the homework. Like, I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. There's nothing that I know that I want to do that requires me to go to school. And as far as I'm concerned, this is like just eating at my soul." And so halfway through my senior year, I was like, I can just stop going to class. I can take this proficiency exam. I can get the certificate from the state. And then if I want to go to school, I'll just go to a junior college and then go off to university if that's what I want to do. Um, and yeah, so I had a couple random jobs, and I ended up selling cars for a Toyota store, which was actually pretty good at. Selling Toyotas wasn't hard, and this was pre 2008, and I didn't understand the economy that I was operating in, but fucking everybody was buying cars. So like I was, 19, 20 years old, selling cars, making good money. So it was like an obvious and easy decision for me to like stop wasting my time, essentially. And now what I call government indoctrination camps, like there was like I didn't need to be taught what to think. It just seemed like such a fucking waste of my time and brain power to just like regurgitate all of this information. And so, yeah, I definitely,
But it's still
um,
ballsy because I'm sure you ran into a lot of people who you wanted to work with or they wanted to hire you and they'd be like, did you go to college? Or,
yeah, I
maybe
was
they look
actually
the other way at you, maybe based on your answers. But a lot of people judge people based
totally,
on those
yeah.
things.
Well, that's why when I got the license from the state of California, it was a very vindicating moment. I was 24 years old when I moved to Humboldt County to grow weed. So I was still young. I could still like, okay, if I was fucking off, like that's not really a problem if you're young. So I didn't really have that issue interfacing with society as a result of being a cannabis producer. And then living in Humboldt, like the whole economy is basically like all the auxiliary businesses are supporting the cannabis producers. A lot of the business owners are producing cannabis themselves. It's kind of like a real Wild West dynamic
Right.
there. But that's why I was so excited when the laws were changing. I felt like I was in the right place in the right time, and it really legitimized me as an individual, as a business person, because I was a high school dropout. But there I am, founded, funded, started my own corporation, converted my nonprofit, my 501c3 to a for-profit. I have a business attorney, a criminal defense attorney, a CPA, and then a state license for my cannabis farm. So it was kind of like that was like my moment where kind of like graduating from college or so they're getting that new
Right.
job or getting tenured somewhere or whatever, right? And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, along the way, I mean, did you ever like maybe sell pot like illegally, or like kind of
Yeah.
have like? Because I wonder, like, I was like Paul Tarantino was on my show recently, prepping for Fiat End, and he was talking about I was like a very young person, Like he had this moment where he was like, maybe I should just be a drug dealer because like it's really hard to get away ahead in the fiat world. Not only is it soul sucking, but between taxes and the way society is structured, like you can kind of get ahead if you make the same money in the black market, it goes a lot further.
Yeah. So I for 3 years I basically worked. I didn't claim any taxes. I didn't do anything other than just stack cash. And as soon as I hit a harvest that was good, I hired an accountant and I went and paid all my back taxes because I knew that the legalization was going to be coming at some point. And I'm pretty risk adverse. Like, I mean, if you go down certain paths in life, like it becomes really hard to come back. And so I was always cognate, aware of that. Um, yeah, and I just knew that the laws were going to be changing at some point because Washington had gone legal, Colorado had gone legal, so it was only a matter of time. So I really worked to position myself so that I could capitalize on the skill set that I had accrued over many years. And growing cannabis it's easy to grow cannabis. It's really hard to consistently grow top tier cannabis. And so I got pretty good at it, and I was determined to become a legitimate licensed farmer.
It just reminds me of growing up. I moved back actually after college back to my hometown, and I was like, oh, I just need find somebody to buy pot from time to time. And I got put in touch with this like fucking crazy kid from my high school, this kid who had like moved out. We were in the suburbs. He moved out from like Brooklyn, New York, at a young age. Became like the biggest like drug dealer in town in a way. And he would set up at like the gas station right across the street from the hospital. And while at the gas station, though, he kind of picked up like how to fix the gas station, like terminal stations, like whatever the pump. He kind of learned about the computers, like just being there, and he ended up becoming like a mechanic with a route. And he would go fix gas stations, selling drugs out of that van. And I think he had a girlfriend in high school. He came into high school one time and like flashed a gun, and cops got involved. So I'm kind of getting friendly with a little bit, just meeting up with him from time to time. But he was the most entrepreneurial person I had ever met from my high school. And he was driving like a brand new, like he always had multiple Cadillacs. He had a lawyer on retainer. He had a really good paying job. He was cycling all and reinvesting all his money into he owned gas stations, like started owning gas stations or a piece of gas station around town. He had this route fixing gas station terminals. He couldn't give up the selling of he couldn't give up selling marijuana. And it wasn't like I don't think paying his bills anymore. It was still kind of getting him in trouble. But the game was like, but he just was like someone who just made money and like kind of was very entrepreneurial, looking at everything he could do. Very interesting guy. He had multiple baby mamas and always family court, and really interesting cat. But like, maybe what was your rabbit hole story like?
Um, yeah, just I'm standing on that property. I just studied just basic stuff. Like, I mean, I'm basically just devouring YouTube and podcasts and whatever for a year while I was waiting to get licensed by the state. And I discovered Bitcoin, and I would actually love to go back and figure out who did the first couple like 1 hour documentaries that were on YouTube at the time. There was one that was really good, and it just laid it all out. Basically, the scarcity, the Keynesian economic issue, the Austrian economic theory, and how Bitcoin allows that to actually like go into effect, become more than just a theory. Like this can become an experiment that we can really play with now. Yeah, and I was just absolutely enthralled because if you have something that has growing demand but a finite supply, and I also just knew that if Bitcoin's an engineered money that is finite in supply, money is essentially a call option on any other good or service that the marketplace produces. And we're producing more of all those goods and services, even with the current mining, especially now since the halving. Bitcoin's the hardest asset on planet Earth. We're still increasing the supply of Bitcoin until we get to 21 million, but we're increasing the supply of the Bitcoin at a slower rate than we're increasing the supply of everything else you can buy with money: gold, real estate, equities, bond, literally anything you buy with money. We're making more of those things. So Bitcoin's convertibility into everything else should, in theory, increase faster than anything else's convertibility in anything else. And yeah, so I sold my property with that understanding, and it also helped me to realize how fucked the cannabis business really was because I didn't have any fiat subsidies. There's no business loans, no government subsidies. I'm a small dude. I'm by myself. I got a single party LLC with a license. Like I can't sell equity. That's only hard money loans. Yeah, so I knew I was in a bad position. So when I sold the property, I bought some Bitcoin. In hindsight, if I knew what I knew now, right? Hindsight's always 2020. I'd have put it all into Bitcoin. But I'm grateful with what I did. Over the years, I kind of bought, more. And then you're in 2019, the price is really low, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to sell any of this, obviously, but I don't know if I should buy any more because I don't know enough. And then when Sailor hit the scene, I had a big, busy year in 2020. And in 2021, when Sailor hit the scene and the Sailor series came out.
Hey Bitcoiners, I'm heading to Bitcoin 2025 in Las Vegas from May 27th to May 29th, and you need to be there. This isn't just another conference, it's the ultimate Bitcoin party. Grab your ticket now using promo code MATRIX or at the link in the description. See you in Vegas, freaks. Let's make this one legendary.
That's when it was like, all right, I was convinced that the probability that this thing goes away is very, very low. And I basically panic sold everything else that I had that had any monetary value beyond its utility value and put it all into Bitcoin. And I determined at that point too that I'm not probably going to be buying a house for a long time. Like my wife and I are talking like, hey, we'll move out of Northern California at some point and we'll buy a house. And like I remember going to where I had some silver that I had saved, and I remember thinking like, okay, so check it out. Why do we want a house? And, all the obvious reasons, right? So we'd be safe, raise our family, do our stuff, whatever. I'm like, but the reality is, like, in some sense, especially with like the geopolitical and the uncertainty in the world, right? It's like we're kind of just better off having this hyper mobile, inviolable capital or property, whatever, and renting a house. Because if we don't like it, we just move somewhere else. You're done in 30 days. Hey, 30-day notice. I got to leave. You don't have to vape 6%. Dude, I sold my farm. I had to pay my real estate agent, my listing agent 3%, and the selling agent 3%. 6% of the value of the property got vaped just to move it. Like that's a low frequency, high friction vessel to have your money in. Yeah. So lots of YouTube.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
renting though. Like we were having a hurricane come.
Yep.
My landlady called me up. She's like, "Yo, did you maybe like prep for anything?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't. I didn't take anything in from outside. You might want to do that. I'm out of town at the moment,
Yeah.
evacuating. You might want to protect your house." And then it's like, like maybe if the house, like the roof blows off, I just call her, like, "Yo, we're not coming back. Like,
Right.
we're done here. Like,
Totally.
just get a new one." Um, I think one of the things that I remember when you came on the scene, and I was just like, "This is fucking awesome. This is so cool." And I think what's like so badass about it is there was a lot of courage to it because not a lot of people talk about cannabis in public,
Yeah.
right? And kind of bring that out in like in a very like I smoke or I work in it, I
Hmm.
grow it. Like it's legal now. It's much more socially accepted. It doesn't mean that like everyone talks about it. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's a little awkward. Sometimes it's so socially accepted. I'll be around dads at just a regular picnic, and someone will be like, "Hey, you guys want to like?" And I'm like, "Guys, it's a kids
A little
party. Like, do
discretion.
we have to talk about it or talk about how cool it is or whatever?" Right?
Yeah.
But I think there was a lot of sort of bravery to it and courage, and it was like sort of badass. But I also think that like with Bitcoin, like there's a lot of ways of looking at Bitcoin. Like I've had Fractal and Krypton. We talk about like especially around psychedelics and mushrooms,
Hmm.
right, and things like acid. But like you can look at it in terms of like mushrooms growing under the earth, like or my what is it
Mycelial network.
mycelium, like with
Yep.
Brandon Quinn, and I've had him on the show, and you can Bitcoin's a mirror. So
Yeah.
like, how is like Bitcoin a psychedelic experience for you, or just in general?
That's a good and then kind of deep question, but actually I've been thinking about that a little bit more. I ate some mushrooms, a heavy dose of mushrooms on New Year's Eve, and I did a decent dose of LSD a couple weeks ago for the first time ever. And so been kind of playing with the intersection, there as a hardcore Bitcoiner, so you're so enthralled by Bitcoin and has a 100% Bitcoin allocation. All of my money is in Bitcoin. I'm not hedged. I don't have any micro strategy. I don't have any gold, any silver, no fucking Apple stock, nothing. All in on Bitcoin. And what I, feel like there's a um, something very interesting, and it's almost religious and ideological, where like there's from a very well and deeply thought out analytical perspective, it's the thing to buy, right? Like if I'm trying to preserve my capital, there's nothing that makes more sense to have. And then what comes with that though is like this peace, and then also this like faith where like I'm putting the faith, my future, in this monetary protocol. Like I heard Eric Kaysen say this, like the world's so fucked. I'm just going to trust this anonymous Japanese figure who made this funny internet money, right? So like I have all of my money into this protocol, and then I'm watching the world grapple with it, right? And it's kind of just like trusting in the universe. Like it's an extension of physics and like this reality that we live in such a deep and profound way that there's nowhere better to have the money. And so like now all my money's in there. I kind of just sit back and just trust that that life is going to work out like it's supposed to. There's this kind of religious, deep spiritual thing there where like, okay, and I'm still evaluating it consciously, like, are the fundamentals still the same? Is there anywhere better for my energy to be? No. Okay, well then it's kind of like relinquishing control to a higher power in some sense. And I also do believe, like I love Jeff Booth's work so much. Like it's Bitcoin is imposing, and this is what Booth says, and I love it. I don't think there's a better way to say it. It's imposing a new rule set on our civilization. This protocol is forcing cooperation in a sense, because there's no way to hijack the system or to bend the rules at anybody else's expense to benefit yourself. So nobody can do that to you. You can't do it to anybody else. So if you want the value that's preserved within that network that somebody has ownership or control over, you need to offer them something that they want, right? And so it's that flip in the incentives that's so special. And so, yeah, from like a moral and ethical like perspective, like I'm voting with my dollar, my money. Like this is the thing that I support. This is the truth protocol. This promotes the incentives and encourages like the kind of civilization and world that I want to live in, right? So it's a clear no-brainer, but it is kind of like an ego death a little bit, kind of like it happened with psychedelics, where you're kind of just like it all matters so much, but it doesn't at the same time. It's like grappling with that deep paradox, And so, yeah, just kind of riding the Bitcoin wave and like happy about it. It's like you just take what Bitcoin's going to give you and you're going to love it, right? And it teaches you so much about life. Like we were talking last night at dinner, like I'm always wrong. Like I always think like we're going to rip and then we crash. And I'm like, all right, we'll just linger here. We'll crash more. And then we rip. Like it's really a wild thing.
Yeah, I also wonder a lot about like whether, I think Bitcoin helps us have high time preference, which helps us, or low time preference, right, which helps us be more present.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, and maybe make life more enjoyable, increases your purchasing power.
Mm.
Do you maybe see similarities where, like, maybe cannabis makes you more present and Bitcoin makes you more present?
That's interesting. So I do think that cannabis, I feel like for me personally, and others I've spoken with, and probably not everybody, but it's like an adaptogen. It has a very modulatory effect. I find that if I'm in a position in my life where I'm too micro focused and I'm really obsessing about small details that don't really matter that much, it helps me to see the macro picture, and then vice versa. If I'm missing some subtle details that I need to pay more attention to, the cannabis, like from that psychological effect, will like help recalibrate me, and it also just like mitigates life's discomfort, right? And Bitcoin does a similar thing where like it helps to calibrate your time preference. Do I really need this thing now, or is it good to wait, right? And I've been dealing with that a little bit now. Like, we've been talking about Florida. I've been talking about moving with my wife for many years. I'm now 3 years past when I thought I would move, because I ended up taking another cannabis consulting deal in Northern California, and going through that process of like, okay, do I deploy the capital now or do I wait? Because purchasing power is going to increase so significantly over this near term. But then, like, if I don't make a move, then I'm just waiting, right? And how much am I willing to wait? Because then, life is finite. Like, if I'm, like, I heard Vivek talk recently, and he was talking about the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Bitcoin's return rate is the new hurdle rate. And in life, I've been grappling with that myself. Like, why would I deploy capital to start some business endeavor when I could just sit on the Bitcoin and get what Bitcoin's going to return? So you have that hurdle rate, but that can also be a problem where, like, I've heard Bitcoiners talk about buying like really cheap and shitty food to try to stack more sats. And it's like, it's kind of okay. I get that. You can grind for a certain period of time, but then you got to make sure that you're enjoying life,
And
right?
there's long-term side effects to eating bad food
Yeah,
that, like, well, you have more money, but maybe you don't live to or be
totally.
healthy for it.
Yeah.
I think it's very fiat to kind of like, I'm just going to buy Bitcoin and hope that does everything for me. I'm never going to spend it. I'm not going to enjoy it. Like, Bitcoin is just money. I'm not saying people should spend it, like, meaning like sell it for take profits,
Right.
but like enhance the quality of your life. Like, you don't know how long you're going to be here. Take care of your family. I don't think there's any shame in that. It's just money at the end of the day. There is this sort of like asymmetric bet that an opportunity will never have.
Totally.
But I'm sure, anyone who's been stacking for a while probably has enough coins or sats, and you just got to really, I should have worded sats.
Yeah.
I think just get those sats to the future. But I wanted to ask you, like one thing I know, I've talked to Jimmy Song. The show's gonna come out soon, but it's about like fiat ruins everything. And like you were talking about with the marijuana business, how it just centralized everything. It destroyed all those family farms,
Yeah.
and it just brought all this debt into the system. And I think in some ways, maybe you get more product, in maybe some scientific ways better product, but in some ways I think you lose sort of like the wholeness of the industry, right? And something that fiat also does is, so like, you end up going to like Walgreens to buy your apple pie, and it's a very sterile, like, horrible transaction at very far arm's length. It's not like going to a local business that's run by a family and buying an apple pie that the family's been making for 80 years.
Yeah.
And I think Bitcoin will bring that back, and sort of bring back, like, destroy big businesses, huge centralized things, and like make things more like family run or small. So like, what is the BB world?
So you've heard me speak to that. Yeah, I call that the before Bitcoin era. Basically, all of known history before 2009. And I do think that now that we're in the AB era, I feel like we fundamentally live in a different reality. Like, the world is different now. Now that you have this, I like to think of Bitcoin as like metaphysical property. Like Saylor says, Satoshi merged the physical world and the digital world. He discovered matter in cyberspace. Well, I kind of think about that as merging the physical world with the metaphysical world. Like, we have matter and like metaphysical matter. We have a scarcity that's in the land beyond. Like, there's this invisible instrument that I could send from me to you. It's no longer in my possession, it's in your possession. And that incentive from violence to peace and consent, now that you have this invisible instrument that can't be gained by a perpetrator, like, if I kill you, I don't get your Bitcoin, that fundamentally changes the incentives and how the world works. And I also believe that, like, the problems that we have in the world were predicated upon the shortcomings of the technology of a yellow shiny rock. Our money, like, Bitcoin is the first money we've ever had. It's an engineered money. Before that, we had what, seashells, yellow shiny rocks, and then derivatives and these political currency units, right? And so that is a corruptible system. You're trusting a third party, right? So the incentive is to figure out how to prevent yourself from being lied to, but you don't have the ability to just to like um, expose dishonest market participants, because you don't know how much gold they have on reserve. They then create laws with their homies and kings or whatever. You got bank holidays, you can't do bank runs. Like, that's like a monumental big problem. Now that we have this decentralized immutable ledger, the incentive structure changes, and I believe that the honest market participants over time will win as a result of that. Like, if one of the BlackRock, let's say BlackRock, for example, if they sold more claims to Bitcoin than they actually have Bitcoin on reserve, then some ETF provider could take over market share by just offering a proof of reserves. And then if BlackRock doesn't show their proof of reserves, people are going to be like, well, I don't trust BlackRock. I'm going to go over here. And you couldn't do that with the gold ETFs, central banks. We have this whole thing now, what's going on with Fort Knox. So that's a real problem. But, back to what you said as far as fiat ruin everything and that centralizing force, like an apple pie that's in Walgreens that's produced with apples that came from 5 states over with glyphosate laden fucking wheat or whatever it is, it's not more energy efficient to produce that product and put it in that Walgreens than it is to get one that's baked from the mom and pop little bakery down the way. It's subsidized through fiat. And without the fiat subsidy, without the money printing, without the shitty currency that then causes people to buy stocks to save their money, and these companies wouldn't have the capital, they wouldn't be able to leverage and get the debt, you wouldn't have that centralizing force. Like it's not more efficient to cut down rainforest and feed cattle glyphosate laden corn and ship the beef around the world than it is to just graze cattle locally. And so without that fiat subsidy, and Bitcoin is going to really decentivize people from using that fiat subsidy in multitude of ways. It's going to bring us back. It's that pendulum swinging from a very centralized way to a decentralized world.
Yeah, I see a lot of people. Like I think about just even food. Like people maybe don't eat steak or something. Steak's very expensive, and I get that. But it's like, let's say you're not eating steak because it's $20 a pound. So you're eating something that's like $8 a pound or out of box for it's $4 a pound. You might save $16 up front, or let's say like 75%. But I think what's happening over time is you're going to spend like 8,000 on medical care 20 years
Yeah.
from now.
Yeah.
And then it's like a lot of people aren't connecting those dots. Like you're spending money to save money in a way.
Yep.
I'm not getting into the fiat versus Bitcoin thing, but just the food, the better thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Walgreens stuff is not only like it's an impersonal exchange, but like you're getting an inferior, like
Yeah.
disgusting product, not even or unhealthy product.
Totally.
And I feel like even just getting a real apple pie from like that's made with whole ingredients from nature is way less
100%.
bad for you. Maybe not at all.
Yeah.
Like the way like we like some like the raw ice cream fade. If everyone's like the raw ice cream is good for you.
Yep.
Right? And it's like this whole notion of ice cream bad for you because of all the sugar that they're adding and the post facto. I think it's also like I think a lot of people maybe take cannabis to maybe enhance or enjoy the world more, maybe to hear music or watch a movie. And I do think like, what do you think? Do you think Bitcoin's the same way, or maybe like how is it like cannabis for you in that way, or how's cannabis like Bitcoin for you then?
I would just say that there's parallel in that, cannabis makes you feel good just and Bitcoin, owning Bitcoin and having property that can't be debased or taken away from you or burned down in a house fire, like that is comforting. And so they're just similar feelings that have nothing to do with each other. But yeah, there's like, solace and like tranquility and there's like a security in knowing that like hey my economic energy is safe, right? And so yeah, it's like a very calming, comforting. Like I remember when I got rid of all my gold and silver and all my cash, like I had Pelican cases like with vacuum sealed cash in it and stuff that was like money that was lawfully earned with my licensed cannabis business that I'm like paying taxes on and whatever, but I still got to hide this cash. Like, so I got to dig up cash, like getting rid of all the cash, all the gold and silver, the physical shit, and having the Bitcoin. Like conceptually, I knew how good it would be, but I remember the day that like I mailed off my last like tube of gold Eagles, and I was just like, oh, I'm so happy to be done
You
with
were
that
really
stuff.
like stockpiling gold. Like
Yeah, because I mean,
what years were the mania of the
like
most gold you were stockpiling?
2015 to like 2020. Between 2018 to 2020, I was buying both Bitcoin and gold and silver, but I had banking impedance.
Well, how much of the gold was because you were debanked?
Most of it. I probably would have hedged against the Bitcoin a little bit with some gold and silver. Maybe if I wasn't having banking issues, maybe I would have cared more to look into like equities and some real estate or whatever. But it was just such the obvious thing. Like I have the cash. I go buy the gold and silver. The guy fills out an 8300 form. He reports the cash to the IRS, but that's fine because I'm paying the taxes. But it's an easy way for me to like, okay, now I don't have cash and I got the gold and silver. And I was like a gold bug for a little bit. Like that made sense to me. But then Sailor, once again, the Sailor series, listen to the Sailor series. And I'm like, yeah, gold is, dude, it's a terrible store of value. Like gold is cool before we had bulldozers and computers and shit. If the gold price goes up, unprofitable gold miners are now profitable and they're just going to go rip up the forest floor and dump more gold on the market. Like there's plenty of gold claims. There's plenty of miners that could be mining more gold. And so, yeah, and then being a commodity producer, I'm like, no, I don't want a commodity. I need a scarcity. And I'm willing to take the risk on it. And it makes much more sense to me than everything else. And it supports the vision for the future that I have.
So I mean, like it sounds like you have a healthy business. You're building some reserves. You're DCAing into cash, gold and silver. How are you? I mean, like store of value. How are you storing it? Like, what are your threat vectors here? Like that. Most people put that in the bank, or they buy a gold ETF. I mean, like, where do you store your gold? Were you ever started contemplating like, can I get? Will I have too much gold, and where am I going to put it?
It became a little bit of a thing for sure. I had 17 acres, so I had 10 acres in a house, 7 acres with my cannabis business on it. So I would just go out into the woods and quite literally like dig like a 4 foot hole with a vacuum sealed product inside of a Pelican case and like bury this. I have to call my dad and let him know like, hey, this is where the valuable stuff is, like kind of coordinated it all. It was a thing for sure. And then I'm dealing with different volumes of cash. So I have cash that like I need to run for the business for the next few months. And but at the same time, like I'm running a cannabis business. I have distributors that have drivers and there's trimmers and there's people coming through. And so like I am vulnerable and I got this cash. So like, do I put it in the safe? Do I go bury it deep somewhere? Do I like stuff it in the attic or something? So it was like this constant 15-year battle of like trying to figure out what to do with my resources so I don't fucking lose them.
Something I wonder about is like the pharmaceuticalization of marijuana. So I don't know if you stayed friendly with your stepdad after your mom passed.
Yeah,
So it sounded like you had some decent bonding experiences snowboarding, I think, but like,
for sure.
and it sounded like beyond maybe some of the issues that weren't great, you had these great conversations and mind expanding kind of like environment in that way. Um, but like I worry, like I mean, like weed's getting a lot stronger. Do you I don't know, like you hear stories like your grandparents were smoking like 8% weed, now it's like 25 or 30 or 35%. Or our children, our grandchildren are gonna be smoking like 80% like marijuana plant. Like, what do you think that's like doing to, like, do you think there's an issue there? Like, do you think it's a slippery slope or it's all good?
I do think that, so I think the pendulum is like swinging one direction, or like the market is really leaning on high THC because there's so much product and it's really hard to differentiate from the different producers because a lot of the states the cannabis is going to be sold in a sealed package that you can't open and you can't see. So the consumer is then trying to get the most bang for their buck. So if they're going to buy 3.5 grams of something that's 20% THC versus 3.5 grams of something that's 30 or 35 or whatever, that's what the consumer wants more of. So then the dispensaries are buying that from the distributors and from the producers. And then so the producers are then trying to figure out how to satiate that market demand with supply. So then the breeders are then trying to figure out how to breed the THC levels as high as possible. And like there's a few trends like really fat calyxes or like the bract of the flower. Like people want the big calyxes, they want strains that are purple, that have more silver hues than like amber hues. They need to have certain terpenes and flavors, and then of course the high THC. And now I don't know how often the weed is like adulterated or actually messed with. I think the big concern would be in states that don't have recreational cannabis and don't have state licensing is the pesticides. Because there are a lot of pesticides that are commonly used on cannabis. They're used on golf courses and all over for normal crops, tomatoes, lettuces, fungicides and pesticides. And so in the states that don't have state license and regulations, they don't have the mandatory testing requirements, and then the producers aren't sending it to labs to get it tested for pesticides. And that's the big concern. And then a lot of the weird products, like, I was in a dispensary recently trying to get a vape pen. And I actually, ironically enough, know the owner of the dispensary because I'd worked with him like 15 years ago when I first got to Humboldt. And I'm talking to the person at the counter, and I'm like, look, what do you have? And she pulls out all these packages, and she's like, I got this one that tastes like icy. This one's a Jolly Rancher. This one's a this and this. So it's really become these like pre-packaged products that are it's kind of hard to know what you're getting. I mean, I'm looking at
Yeah.
all this stuff. I'm like, I know
I do.
all about what goes into this, and I have no fucking clue what's in front
I'm
of me.
so suspect of the vape trend. I
Yeah.
think we're going to wake up and people are going to do a lot of unintended consequences there. I think a lot of adults are moving to that because it's a more discreet thing. There's
Yeah.
less odor, hide it
Yeah.
from the kids kind of thing. But I just don't know what's in the oils.
It's
And
in most states,
I think those things are like at a triple the concentration of
90%
right.
plus.
So
Yeah.
like I really wonder, okay, so there's all the psyops, right? And you don't
Yeah.
know like is this the psyop or is this the anti-psyop, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so like since the 20s like marijuana has been very like I forget the movie that came Reefer Madness. The
Yep.
government's been anti-marijuana, right?
Big time.
And the government's been anti-nicotine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which some people now are saying is a super drug, right? It
I've been
protects you
getting
from
into that.
COVID, and you're
Yeah.
getting into it. And I have other Bitcoin friends who are into it, and Bitcoin is just a euphemism for truth seeker. But like, yeah, other people I know are getting into these things, right? And that blue potion thing, and
Yep.
right. So and then like I wonder though, and then what's the other one? So it's like alcohol. The government like really pushes alcohol, right? Like
Yeah.
I think there's the government and Hollywood are in bed, right? So it's like an advertising and marketing. So it's like every commercial, especially before the pharmaceutical craze of COVID and then buying all the ad spots, used to be alcohol when they could be on the
Mm-hmm.
TV. And alcohol is like in every movie. It's every scene.
Dude, so
Cool, right?
romanticized.
So romanticized, right? And now we're getting to this place where like marijuana, I wouldn't use the word romanticized, but much more like the government's like, we're gonna let this go.
Yeah.
And now you're getting to a place where like cities are like kind of like getting overpopulated with dispensaries, people are smoking on the streets. It's like
Yep.
it's getting a little much. And I wonder with the increase in the THC and the pharmaceuticalization of it, because I don't think it's like a natural trend for marijuana to get this strong,
Yeah.
to not have the synergistic properties of all those other things that they're squeezing out to get the high THC.
Yeah.
That like maybe this is the like to numb the fuck out of society.
That's interesting.
It's like 60
Yeah.
people are smoking 80-90% of vaping,
Yeah.
to numb the fuck out way beyond maybe just a pleasant buzz or
Yeah.
like a low time preference thing,
Yeah.
And I really wonder because now like you hear the nicotine's a super drug, right? So it's like which one is truly bad for you? Which one is
Yeah.
and it's interesting the way they're letting it go that way though.
It is. And as much as I like to get intoxicated on conspiracy, in my experience watching what's happened with cannabis, I truly believe that it is just the free market kind of working itself out.
Right.
And I think that what'll happen is that we'll actually see more of a demand in the future for high CBD strains or strains that have different terpene profiles. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily think that there's too much crazy stuff going on with that. I actually think it's fiat incentivized, that people want to figure out how to get their dollar to go further.
Yeah, I think that's the
That's it.
natural part on the consumer side, right?
Yeah.
And I get that like then they want to offer it to them.
Yep.
But like, I just think there's some things where like everyone should stop and think sometimes about where
Yeah.
it's actually going and what we're losing by going there.
Yeah.
Is my concern. And I start to wonder, like, is it this like massive numbing of society? When it's getting so heavily, this sedated quality of it,
Yeah.
or the power behind it.
Well, I kind of feel like to a certain degree, the acceptance on behalf of the system or the government is like dual fold. One, they need the money because they're so fucking broke. Right? So as the currency is debased, the entity, you could say the government, who's responsible for the monetary policy or the fiscal irresponsibility and the encouragement of the debasement of the currency, is in turn shooting itself in the foot as it drinks off that spigot of fiat, because doing so is putting more dollars into the marketplace, driving the goods and services that the entity that's responsible for the debasement needs to operate, right? So it's this feedback loop. And so as the government gets more tight, the incentive to be able to tax and regulate the industries that it can increases. And so I think that there's more of like, in the conservative areas, especially like the very Republican conservative states that have been late to get to, or still not okay with cannabis. I think that the conversation evolves as the counties or the state or whatever are dealing with their budgets. They're like, fuck, how are we going to pay all the bills, right? That, and then there's also like the digital panopticon. So there's a certain element of like, okay, well, if I'm like some diabolical evil overlord, I could kind of be looking at the world and like, all right, we'll let the peasants have their weed. Who gives a fuck? We got it on lock, right? And maybe 50 years ago, you wouldn't want everybody to like smoke a plant and then think to themselves like, why do we need the government? Like, do we need these
Because we had hard money
motherfuckers?
50 years ago. They wanted us out in the
Yeah.
fields working.
Like, hold on, smoke this weed, and then like, wait a second, like, why are we bombing all these people all
Right.
the time? Like, maybe we shouldn't do that, right? And so, yeah, I think that it's the two things there.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the incentives. I think we're going to be federally legal at some point. Well, actually, maybe not. I don't know. Now that we have the whole Bitcoin conversation, because I think that two things: the government needs money. That's a huge industry to tax, and then I also think they want to get rid of cash, right? So then
Totally.
you get all the cash into the bank. Because cannabis, I think, is the biggest industry. I don't know what
That's
the
interesting.
statistics are, but it's like the last
Cash
mega
bastion,
cash,
right? Where
cash
people showed up
industry.
with wads of cash. And like,
Enormous amounts of cash.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I go to my distributor to pick up payments from them, and there's like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
well, it's a very weird situation. So, like, Jack Mahler's dad was on What Bitcoin Did, and he's like, they kind of came to the industry very slowly. It's a great episode. People should check it out. I'm not going to go break down the whole thing, but like, he had a great comment where it was like, what's the difference between a recreational user and a medicinal user? And it's like, what? And it's like, nothing.
Yeah.
It's the same, you
Yeah.
know? And so, like, what is scumbaggery? Hey, Bitcoiners, get your sats off your exchange now. This is not a drill. Thea is the world's simplest Bitcoin self-custody solution. With their module multi-sig vaults, you decide how to hold your keys. Thea is working day in and day out to bring you the most intuitive Bitcoin self-custody solution, regardless of how much you own or what your storage goals are. And they support your favorite hardware. Download Thea now for hassle-free Bitcoin self-custody at thea.us/Cedric. That's THEYA.us/CEDRIC.
Scumbaggery. Do you know what? I probably heard somebody say that. If I did hear someone else say that, I couldn't remember when or where, but I typically am not the most original person. I like pick up cool things that I hear from other people. But I just think it's like people like, I don't know, fiat fucking dummies that are like just skewing the line of ethics to like line their pockets. I feel like there's like a low grade like psychopathology that like people like deal with in the fiat world, where like you're going through life, you're trying to do the right thing, and I actually talk about it from I call it the game theoretic fuckness, where the dishonest market participants in the BB paradigm, all of history before Bitcoin, had the market advantage. If they could get away with their dishonesty, then they have an advantage in the marketplace over the honest individual. And there's like a zero-sum game dynamic or element that seems to be baked into most of the business and that we see take place in the world today. It's kind of like you see that saying where it's like, or you see two people talking and one guy's like, oh, I don't know, like you kind of did me dirty here, buddy. And he's like, well, it's just business. So like, what do you mean it's just business? So you're okay just like kind of fucking me over here, right? And so I think that's the fiat-induced scumbaggery, but I really actually think it's just it's an issue that stems from not having a technological solution, and basically an honest ledger. Like Jeff Booth says, like you can't have an honest society built on a dishonest ledger. You have a dishonest ledger. And then with the money printing, you create this dynamic where there's an incentive to try to figure out how to drink off the spigot of newly minted currency. And then it creates this political issue too, where like politicians basically like treat the government like a rental car. Like they get in there and they just drive the fuck out of it, dude, to just benefit them and theirs, and they just fucking pass it on to the next guy, fucking engine light on, dripping oil, brakes are smoking, cigarette burns on the seat, and they're like, all right, buddy, it's your turn. And then some other politician gets in there and just beats the shit out of the... And like the thing that's so fucked too is that the non-property owning productive class is the one who pays the price for all of that. It's like the energy is being stolen. It's the Cantillon effect. It's being stolen from the have-nots and given to the have-yachts. It's like that's the bifurcation of our society: have-yachts and have-nots, and it's a result of just the broken fiat paradigm.
Yeah, I remembered what I was going to say before, though. It was like you were talking about the wads of cash, right? And it's the last bastion of the cash industry. But it's all done, especially under the like sort of the medicinal side of it, like under this guise of like, so you go in there and you have your wads of cash, whatever, you go to the ATM, but like, then you're like, I'm here for my medical marijuana. Can I have Gorilla Blaze Sunset Trails, please? And it's like, or can I have the Uzi machine gun diesel? And it's like, this doesn't sound medicinal. And it's really interesting. I think like, what do they call it? Bud tenders or something, but it's probably the friendliest consumer experience where people are probably paying very high end prices, bringing in a lot of money, spending a lot of money. That's very nice, but like it's a weird thing where it's like under the guise of like this should be like a pharmacist who's like explaining how it works and like giving you like where it's more like you'll come in and they'll be like you buy your thing and they're like have a great weekend or you'll say have a great weekend and they'll be like well yours is gonna be good now and it's like this doesn't sound like a medicinal and it's all LARPing in a way for the business and for in a way the fiat um, which is interesting. But like, I wanted to know, like, what would you ever sell your Bitcoin for?
Only things that I'll sell my Bitcoin for now are things that I need to enhance the quality of my life. Like I feel like Bitcoin is the final trade. I forget somebody coined that. I forget who it is, but like I love that. Like it's the final trade. I remember in 2021 I was chatting with my dad. Bitcoin was maybe 60 grand a coin, and we're talking, and I'm like, hey, I got this Bitcoin, and he's like, I'd sell it. I'm like, for what? He goes, I don't know, you're up. I'm like, yeah, you don't understand Bitcoin then. Like there's nothing better to sell it for. So yeah, I consider myself to live on a quasi Bitcoin standard. I have to interface with fiat, and so I have to, if I need capital, I got to turn the Bitcoin into dollars and then pay for my trip here to Florida or whatever. If I earn dollars and there's extra, it goes right into Bitcoin. So maybe at some point I'll change my attitude around, owning real estate. It would have to be a place that I really loved and I wanted to be at and have enough spending power in terms of Bitcoin to justify that. But honestly, I love the optionality, the freedom. And I have also felt so rooted into my life and like the place that I've been and the physicality of all the equipment and the greenhouses and the stuff. There's something so nice, like personally, about digitizing and dematerializing that's like very liberating for me. And yeah, so there's nothing I'll sell the Bitcoin for other than like life experience, to enhance the quality of my life for my family and I.
What about, Bitcoin and maybe like things like simulation theory, or like, what about like, combined with that, like cannabis is from God. Do you think Bitcoin is from God? Do you think there's like almost like the simulation we're living in with Bitcoin as well, and it's part of it?
That's an interesting one. I think about simulation theory from time to time because I do, from the spiritual perspective, I kind of feel like we're like source energy experiencing itself. We're like a fractal of source energy. I think we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I think that in that sense, like we are limitless, eternal, spiritual beings, like our soul. And if you are that limitless being that's can do anything, be anywhere or whatever, like you would choose to experience limitation. And the idea of simulation theory, I was listening to, gosh, I forget his name. It's on YouTube. There's a few, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson and a few other scientists were talking about simulation theory. And the idea is basically like whether it would be 5 years or 5,000 years or 500 years from now, 500,000 years from now, with the rate of change in technological advancement, we should be able to make a virtual reality that's indistinguishable from base reality. Could take 500,000 years. But if that's the case, then it's actually not probable we live in base reality, right? And so I like to think about life at like kind of like a video game. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's fun to think about. And if that's the case, and we are in like a simulation, it's almost like Satoshi in the few lines of code that he wrote and released, like updated the simulation, and like the simulation or this reality fundamentally operates differently now. We have this metaphysical property. We can now put our energy into the realm beyond, the land beyond, the ethers, the whatever that is. Is that the place where we come to and go from when we die, we're born, or whatever? But I kind of think about it in that very spiritual and metaphysical sense. And then, like, gosh, there's something so beautiful about that as well, because you'll never stop people trying to hoard. It's like Jack Mallers was talking about, money is time and energy in an abstracted form. And you'll never have enough because you'll never have enough time or energy. You'll always want more. But if you can take that greed or that desire to have more and then allow us to store it in this thing that's invisible, then people now aren't hoarding houses or other things that people need to live and exist, right? And that's gonna like liberate all these things that have utility value that people need. So
That's awesome. I do think life is like a video game. I think there's certain people who get the ability like to play the game on a level that others aren't, and to like control the other players, or like kind of read the simulations, or even like imagine more simulations so they can get better at predicting which one is going to be the one that plays out. It's interesting. I don't know if
it's like
Bitcoin
the
is
Matrix. I mean,
well, it is.
you know,
And think about the Matrix. I don't know if Bitcoin is from God or Satoshi, from God or from DARPA. Like DARPA would really be scary, like it's like from the Matrix in a way. And it doesn't be scary. It wouldn't change Bitcoin, and it wouldn't make me feel differently about it. But like it would be an interesting wrinkle to human history, and sort of Bitcoin. And Michael Dunworth talks about this on a prior episode we have. But Bitcoin is like marijuana in the sense that like marijuana keeps giving you more, in the sense that like you can grow it from a seed, and then you can take seed from that plant when you run out of the marijuana you want to use and consume, and then grow more marijuana, and then hopefully if you like marijuana or want to sell it or consume it, you can grow more and more, that you have more than you can use, and hopefully even sell, and then so it just keeps giving you more. It's like a fruit tree, and you plant little seeds. And Mark Yusko talks a lot about how people think about like investing, and they, unfortunately, when they rebalance, they cut their flowers and water their weeds. And it's funny they call marijuana a weed, but it's really like it is a flower, and it blooms and flowers, and it's actually a beautiful thing. So I'm gonna leave it to you for any. I mean, this has been an incredibly dope conversation. I'll leave it to you for any parting words, and let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, I would say, well, one of the things that I think I would look forward to the world becoming more consciously aware of, and that is that your house, your car, your Apple stock, like everything that people own that they think is including your Bitcoin, it's not actually going up in value. Everything on planet Earth is going down in value in real terms. So there's this optical illusion, like, I bought my house for 400 grand, it's now worth $600,000-$700,000. Your house isn't worth more. The dollar's worth less. And so you have to think like, because like we could denominate the value of the house in cars, or the car in chickens, or whatever. So if you think in that terms, like, the thing that I would want to see people become more consciously aware of is that their house or their car, their Apple stock's not going up in value. It's going down in value in real terms. It's just going up in value in dollar terms. And Bitcoin is not actually going up in value. It's only going up in value in its convertibility into other goods or services. And so if people become aware that there's this optical illusion, that they're not actually getting wealthier by owning real estate or stocks or bonds or whatever, I think that they would then understand the value of Bitcoin more. And I think that's pretty important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Eric V Stacks. I haven't been posting much recently, but been doing a couple interviews. There's a few things coming out. So yeah, man, stoked to be here. It's been an enjoyable conversation.
Likewise, bro. It's been so dope.
Yes.
Thank you, man. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bitcoin Matrix. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with any questions or thoughts you may have. We'd love to hear from you. You can support the show by checking out our sponsors and affiliate links in the description. It helps keep bringing you great content while connecting you with awesome products that I believe in. Share this episodes with your friends, family, or anyone curious about Bitcoin. And let's keep growing this community together. Stay curious, keep stacking, and I'll catch you in the next one.